So this is an introduction to the Safe Stack. My name's Ian Russell, that's my Twitter handle, @IJRussell. Hands up first of all, how many of you have dabbled in F#? How many of you feel comfortable in F#? Okay, right. So I know where to, at least I know where to pitch this. I love F#, that's the F# org thing up in the top top right hand corner. A little bit about me. I've been a dev for over 20 years. I actually graduated from here. Not that I was actually at Collegiate Crescent before it became a nursing training place. It used to be an education place. So I did a B.Ed in mathematics. I think it was 95. It might have been 94. I'm quite old, you know. I'm struggling to remember the exact time. I know I started as a student at the Poly, and I finished at a university. So it's around that sort of time. Even though I've got 20 years as a dev, I don't know everything. In fact, I'd argue that I know a lot more than I did 20 odd years ago, but percentage of what I possibly need to know, I probably know less now than I did 20 years ago. You know, things are changing that much. So, what I want to talk about, just going to do an introduction to the Safe Stack. Just like the one that David did, we're going to do our ABCs and learn what safe actually means. And then we'll have a look at some code samples as well from there. If you've got any questions, ask as we go along. I'll try and explain as best I can the F# code. So, what is a Safe Stack? The blurb says it's an open source, free, flexible, end-to-end, functional first stack for cloud-ready web applications that emphasizes type-safe programming. It's end-to-end F#, all of it. So it's all type-safe. So you generate JavaScript by writing F#. You do CSS by writing F#. You create HTML by writing F#. You create F# by writing F#. So, but what it really is that bottom picture. So the S stands for Saturn, and Saturn's a web server. Think of it as MVC, as ASP.NET MVC. It all sits on top of .NET Core. It's all brand new and shiny and wonderful. The A bit is Azure. So it's all hostable in Azure. It's also hostable in Docker as well, in Kubernetes. On the client side, we have two things. We have Fable, which is our F# to JavaScript transpiler. And then we have Elmish. And Elmish is a UI framework. And the UI framework we can use for not just HTML, we can use it for other things as well, all written in F#. It's based on Elm. Elm's an ML language just like F#. So converting to Elmish was quite easy. So, not only do we have Saturn, we also have Giraffe. I love some of these names. You know, they obviously sit down somewhere and think about, you know, what's the stupidest name we can come up with and get away with, and it seems to work. So we've got Kestrel sat at the bottom, which is all the nice shiny new ASP.NET Core stuff. And then we've got the wrapper around that, which is the real ASP.NET Core stuff, the HTTP context, etc. And then we have Giraffe, which is basically F# abstractions around the ASP.NET Core stuff. And you can use that directly if you want, and a lot of people are doing that. So if you want to go low level, particularly if you want to do APIs, it's a fantastic way of working. Or you use Saturn, and Saturn's just an abstraction layer on top, written in F# that makes it much easier to use. It's much more like MVC. So it's much more like the applications and controllers that we know from MVC. Azure. Hopefully most people are using Azure now. Certainly in Birmingham, where I work, or tend to work, most companies are moving to the cloud now and moving away from self-hosting stuff. I was actually quite surprised to see Windows Forms today. It's got to be 10 years since the last time I saw it, but it obviously still works. Does that work in the cloud? So the Azure side, it supports the hosting services, so it supports app services and it supports Docker and Kubernetes as well. It also supports all the platform services as well. So all of the Azure functions, service bus queues, service fabric, Cosmos DB, whatever you want, there's an F#, there's F# code for it. So, Fable, this is one of the areas that's changed massively from when I started. There's a lot of libraries. JavaScript is one of those things where every day there's about 10 new libraries, and they're all super and they're all better than what came before. So one of the things that these have done have chosen a library that seems to work, which is Fable. And Fable's a translator that creates good JavaScript code. So what it produces is ES 2015 code, which I'm told is about as good as you can get. So it's all modules and classes. It also uses Webpack under the covers as well, so it does all the bundling up and minimizing and all the rest of it for you. And it also does things like hot module loading. So one of the things I really liked, I did some Node development a few years ago. One of the things I really liked about that was I could have the application running, write some code, save it, and it would just appear. The new version would appear there running. You can do that in F# as well. Exactly the same with the safe stack. And it will create source maps on the fly as well. So if you want to debug your code and step through it, you can do all of that. Elmish. So we now have model view update to go with model view controller and all the rest of them. So model view update is quite simple. Functional languages are immutable. So what this is doing is it takes an existing model and then you update it, but you don't actually update it. What you create is a brand new one. And you send the new one up and it gets put out as a view. This seems like a really good pattern, and it works not just in, as I said, in HTML, but it also works for mobile clients. So there's a mobile client version of this as well, and there's also a WPF version of it as well. So you can use the same code and output to different end types. In fact, there you are. So there are 3 renderers at the moment. You'll also notice the word React. By default, it creates React code. It also does Redux code as well. So anybody who does web development, it's pretty up to date. So that's the safe stack. There's a web server. There's a lower level web server if you want to use that. You can then use Azure. You can also use AWS or also the Google one as well, which I can't remember the name of. It'll come back to me at some point. Fable for your JavaScript and your HTML and all the rest of it, and Elmish for your model view update. You also don't have to use all of it. So if you're only writing back-end services and you want to write everything else in JavaScript and HTML and CSS, you can just use the back-end stuff. You can also just use the front-end stuff on its own. So if you don't want to use the back-end stuff and you've got MVC apps and the rest of it that you're quite happy with, but you like the programming model that Fable and Elmish give you, then you can do it that way as well. And obviously you don't have to host in Azure. So you can host locally, or you can host in Azure or host in Docker, and then host in Azure. So, how do I get started? Like all the .NET Core stuff, there's a template. Template's not complete. The template has the things that most people are using in there, but not everything currently. So the first line there is we're going to install Fake. Is anybody using Cake for their builds? Have a look at Cake. If you're doing C# development, look at Cake for builds. You'll be surprised at what's possible. So Fake is the F# version of Make, and Cake is the C# version of Make as well. They're great things. So you have to install that globally, first of all. So that's what the first line does. Second line installs safe templates. And the third line creates a new safe application based on the defaults. And then to get it to run, we don't click on the little green arrow. We run a command line script. So we run fake, build, target, run. Tell it to run. So we're building through fake. So, safe template. As I said, there are defaults. So the default on the server is Saturn, rather. The default on layout is Forma. So Forma is a CSS framework. Again, it's all F#. So you don't write any funky CSS. You write some funky F# that produces funky CSS. Deployment, so the default is none, so just go locally. And then the dependencies, the JS dependencies, you've got to have a tool there. So the default is Yarn, but you can choose NPM if you wish as well. But Yarn seems to be the more popular one at the moment. Right, that's the safe stack. So we'll look at some code. Right, so what I did earlier, because I wasn't sure I'd have everything up and running, is I've created my default. So it's a brand new site, nothing on it at all. I haven't done anything with it. All I've done is create it and run it. So it's running on my local machine. It's all in .NET. That's my command line, so it's telling me things are running, telling me when everything goes, and have a client. You're supposed to go, ooh. Yeah, you're supposed to be impressed at this. No, obviously it's just a simple thing. It's a template to get you up and running, and show that it all works. And it does, it's all plugged in. So it does sort of stuff. I can have a look at the console. I've got something failing on here for some reason at the moment. But it's telling me about the state, it's telling me what's happening to it. So, let's go and have a look at some code. That's the most important bit. So, you'll notice there's two bits, client and server. And on the client side, there's a client.fs, which is client F# code, and there's shared as well. On the server side, there's a server.fs and shared. Shared stuff, obviously, is the stuff that gets shared between client and server. So you've got things like validation. You can share validation between server and client. So you can have F# validation on the server, and you can have it turned into JavaScript to use in the front end. Exactly the same code. Not going to show any of that, but yes, you can do all of that. So let's take a quick look at the server to begin with. So you'll notice it has a similar pattern to things like Web API and MVC, particularly Web API. So you've got the get, you've got the routing in there already built in. So there's nothing funky about this at all. And obviously there's some setup. So this isn't actually that different from a Web API in the .NET Core world from the server side. And look at the shared. All the shared has is the counter, because that's the thing that gets shared between the front and the back, nothing else. So the server side is just server-side code. It is just like Web API most of the time. The funky bit is the client side. You're either going to love this or you're going to hate it. I think I know where we're going to go, but so we have a simple record type which contains a counter. The option bit on the end there is because there's no, well, I was going to say there's no such thing as null in F#. There is such a thing as null, but we don't like to use it. So when you write normal functional F# code, you won't use null. What you'll use is an option type. An option type is just like a nullable type in C#, except it works for everything, not just the simple types, not just ints and things like that. So what you get for an option type is you get two things. You get either sum of a value or none, and you have to then test to see whether you've got a value or not, rather than waiting for the null reference exception and then fixing that, which is what we currently do. We then have messages. So there are three types of message there. There's increment, decrement, and initial count loaded. So this is what they call a discriminated union. So this means there are three types of messages that you can send, and that's it. So it's a bit, when it gets compiled down to IL, what it actually gets compiled down to is an abstract class called message, MSG, and three concrete classes called increment, decrement, and initial count loaded. But that doesn't really explain what they are. A discriminated union like this. So has everybody been using pattern matching in C#7? Yes, no? Everybody heard of it? Okay, so one of the things that came out in C#7 was pattern matching. Pattern matching's obviously been in F# since day one. So pattern matching is the other side of discriminated union. So we have a discriminated union, then we pattern match against the message types. So the message can only be one of those three things. So result is an interesting one. Every function in F# has to return a value. So in C# what we do is if something goes wrong, we throw an exception. We don't like doing that in F#. What we do instead is wrap everything up in a result. So what you get is a result of success route or error route. And then you do some pattern matching to check the result of it. You check to see if you've got a problem or not. So rather than throwing an exception. So all F# functions, every single part of an F# function must return the same type. So if you want to throw an exception, you have to return a result with the exception bit filled in. So init is one of the things that comes with Elmish. So Elmish has an init, which does exactly what you think it does. So it initializes. There's an update, and there's a view further down as well, but we don't want to go on to that at the moment. So at the moment, it probably looks like gobbledygook. It's not. It's fairly logical once you get into it and understand it, just the same as C# and object-oriented programming was. Gobbledygook when you first did it, and now it's second nature. So what this init function is doing is returning a tuple. So we all have tuples in C#. Particularly now we've got some, in C#7 there's a load of new handlers in there, and in 7.1 as well, I think there's a few more that they put in. So you can now do really nice pattern matching to unwrap tuples rather than having to do first and second. They're much nicer now. You can actually get them, so you can do var and then have the two variables equals the tuple, and it just takes them out for you. So F# said that all the time, but so what that's returning is a tuple of model and a command of type message. So the initial, it has to return something. So the initial model is just saying there's no counter, and then it's got a load of stuff that I'm not going to go into at the moment. Update. So remember I said pattern matching. We've got the discriminated union of the types. We've now got pattern matching on the types. So what we have here is we're checking against, remember I talked about the option type, where it's either sum of, in this case, an int or none. So when we do the pattern matching, we're testing if there's a value there and the type of the message. So if there's a value there and its increment, we're going to create a new model. So there's no updating the old model. What we do is create a brand new one and send that out. So this is pattern matching all the way down. So everything that happens when you click on a button, all it does is creates a message that gets sent down, and the message gets picked up by the server side. It determines where it wants to go, and then sends the message back up to the front again, back up to update. So if we go back to my drawing. So when you click on a button, you get some HTML sent to the. When something happens, you get an update sent through up to the update function, and it then says, "What's my current model?" So you get that, and you update the current model, send it back to the view, and it updates the view. So it's a fairly simple pattern. If you're doing Redux, you're already doing this. So that's what model view update is. So if you're already using React Redux, then you're already doing it. Any guesses what this is? What it looks like? It is, particularly what type of view code? HTML? Okay, so what do we think of that? That's fair. Obviously, it's less verbose than HTML. So this is Fable. So this is generating HTML from this guy, and JavaScript as well, from this. So things like buttons, tying buttons together. Again, it's all done through code. The great thing about this is all type safe. So if it doesn't compile, it won't work. If it compiles it, chances are it will work. It's also got IntelliSense for everything as well. Now, when I first saw this, I thought, how on earth is that going to work in the real world? Because in the real world, we have designers that design HTML, and I can't imagine them writing that. But then I thought about it. Even with things like MVC, it's not that simple. I've certainly not for the last 10 years, I've not received HTML and CSS well, CSS I have, but certainly HTML. I've not received HTML from a designer and said, thank you very much, we'll use that as it is, and plug it straight in. It doesn't work that way. Yeah, we still have to make changes, we still have to plug our MVC stuff in. This is sort of going a little bit further, but what you're getting with this, as I said, is type safety. You know, so it's one of those things. It's do you live with having something that looks very developer-y, that's all nicely structured and type safe, and you know that it's going to work, or do you live with HTML that looks something that you can pick up every day, you can hand to most people to work on, and cross your fingers that it does work? So this is the view function from Elmish, and obviously it takes a model, and all it's doing is creating some HTML for us. Really simple. Don't know if I want to go any further with that. So one of the problems with being shown lots of stuff is it can get very confusing very quickly. And particularly lots of stuff where if you don't understand the core language it's written in, it's then very hard to pick up the things that I'm trying to get across as well. The whole idea of this is it's a really simple framework that you can get up and running very quickly. Once you understand how the things fit together, producing websites is very quick and easy. So there are quite a few companies out there now using the safe stack. So it's not vaporware. It's not something that people are saying, "Oh, use this. It's fantastic," and nobody's actually using it. There are companies actually using it out there, and the reason they're using it is because it's quick and easy to use and it's stable. So the people who've written stuff a year ago with old versions of templates that they've fixed, and they've not had any problems with their code. You know, and that for me is just unbelievable. You know, one of the great things about F# for me is that it's not quite Haskell in that if it compiles it works, but it's pretty close. If it compiles, chances are it's pretty close to working. Whereas a lot of the C# code that I see out there, I cross my fingers a lot of the time. You know, I'm not really sure so things like immutability, I know all the time what my code is doing. I know all the time what my values are. I know what changes what, because nothing changes anything. All it does is creates new ones. Whereas in the C# world, what I've unfortunately found a lot of the time is that people use things in ways that they were never intended to be used, and they bolt things on to other things and make changes where you didn't expect them to happen. I'm not saying F# stops that. It obviously doesn't. But what you tend to do is to write different style of code when you write F#. So that discriminated union and pattern matching is something that happens all over the place. You know, they're some of the core things of F#, along with types, so record types in particular, and immutability. So you remember some of those things, and actually F# not that complicated to learn. So there have been F# libraries before for the web. There have been end-to-end F# libraries for the web. Let's call them complicated, because that's what they are. They use lots of funky characters, and somebody that's coming new into F#, trying to pick them up, it's very difficult. What this does is actually makes life a little bit easier. So I've ran 4 or 5 dojos, so day-long things with people to learn the safe stack, and by the end of the day they're getting quite productive. And they're people that do C# currently, and that are learning F#. You know, the problem that we have in the F# world is that people are very scared of F#. People are very used to C# and like it, and it's a really good language, and you're right to like it. But you could be a lot more productive with F#. I'm sorry, I'm very opinionated. I forgot to say that. I'm not ranting, but I'm probably not far off. But all you're doing is learning a few patterns, a few styles. So all these things like polymorphism and list code substitution, all the rest of it that we learnt in object-oriented, there's an equivalent set in functional programming, functions. But there are a few patterns of them. So there are things like discriminated unions, pattern matching in there that people use. And obviously things like immutability. So for me, I liked this the first time I saw it. As I said, I've seen 2 or 3 other frameworks in F#, which I didn't like. And part of the reason I didn't like them is that they were really one person, well, not just one person, but one company supporting them. This has now got half a dozen companies supporting it. You know, and it's open source, so there are other people helping with the code bases as well. And I'm not going to convince anybody to jump to it, but what I do suggest is that you go and have a look at the SafeStack site, and that you have a play around. You know, that's the purpose of this, really. You know, I know I'm never going to convince a room full of ASP.NET MVC. Hopefully, you're all MVC and not web forms developers. You'd be surprised. Just the same as there's web forms out there, there's web forms everywhere as well. Yeah, lots of people doing it, and it works. You know, you may not like it, but it works. But I think this is so much nicer. This is so much cleaner. But it's a very hard sell. But we need people to jump. We need people to look at it and say, you know, this solves some of our problems. And if producing code that you're happy and confident that it works solves some of your problems, then I think that's a good route to go on. Of course, if you produce perfect code all the time, then F#'s not for you. Right. So SafeStack is SAFE. So Saturn, Giraffe, Azure, AWS, Docker, Kubernetes as well. But obviously they don't fit in with the A, but you get the general idea. Fable and Elmish. Safe is one of those names that we're trying to get them to change. Because has everybody heard of the of safe as in S little a small big F big E? It's a oh, I forgot what it's called now. I was going to call it an agile methodology, but I didn't mean that. It's big style Scrum. So it's Scrum for really big companies. So there is already something called Safe, and it's not something that I sort of recommend or like. Don't like Scrum anyway, but certainly don't like Safe. So one of the things we get about Safe is oh, I don't want to talk about that. So maybe a different name. I don't know. Plus, sorry. Oh, I don't know. Unicorn. I don't know. It's difficult. At the end of the day, you know, it's not. It's people haven't heard of it. You know, people won't jump to it. If it's got a nice name, people do. You know, people will tend to look at it. If they find out it's F#, probably they won't look at it. Yeah, it's building that level of interest, if you like. You know, it's the same with getting people to learn F#. You know, a lot of people learn it or try to learn it and get to a certain level, and then it sort of ramps up a little bit and people just stop. You know, whereas if they'd have spent an extra, you know, a couple of months, they'd have got over that plateau and would be very productive in it. So most people that so I know a couple of guys who worked for a power generating company in Coventry, and they'd got a team. Well, prior to them, there was a team of something like 30 developers writing something in C#. And they tried for well over a year to get this thing to work. It's building contracts for the energy industry, and some of the calculations were really complex, and they could get something like 9 of the 10 to work reasonably well, and one they just couldn't get to work at all. So these two guys, one knew F# quite well, one knew F# a little bit, and he obviously learnt it very quickly, and they brought somebody else in as well who'd never done any F#, who's a Java developer, brought him in, and within 6 months they'd written the full app, all of the contracts written, and one of the contracts was 2 pence out in something like 150 million, you know, for the overall value. So it's very easy to learn. Once you start writing it, it's very easy to write it. You know, you do similar things over and over again. maybe it was just the type of app they were writing that made it much simpler. But it is, you know, it's one of those things, if you've got somebody who knows it, learning it from them is quite easy. Learning it on your own is quite difficult because it's a paradigm shift. If you're used to working with polymorphism and interfaces and all the rest of it, and suddenly go to functional, it's a very different way of thinking about the world. And yeah, I bet if I ask who likes Link, I'll probably get every single hand up. Link's functional. Yeah, Link is perfect definition of functional code. And most people love it. And yet, in fact, I know a few people who love Link hate functional programming. You know, it's if you write a lot of JavaScript, a lot of the JavaScript that's being written now is functional. You know, people have cottoned onto the idea that the web is fundamentally, or HTTP is fundamentally, stateless. And stateless works better if you have immutable data. And that works better with functional than it does with non-functional. And the other one we talked about was safe templates as well. So getting up and running. If I'd have done it, it takes about, I think it took about 30 seconds on my machine to build a brand new site from scratch. So it's just the same as building a new MVC site, except you don't get that. You don't get a ton of stuff. So where can I learn more? So if you go to GitHub, there's a safe stack thing there, and there's tons and tons and tons of resources on there and stuff on how to learn this. And if you're really keen, this Saturday, I'm doing an F# safe stack hack day in Birmingham for free for the whole day. So if you can make your way to Birmingham, you can spend a whole day learning it from scratch. And I'm quite confident that the people that go there that have no F# experience will be loving it by the end of the day. I'd even bet £1 on it. So with that, thank you very much.